Lunga Mantashe, who is a distinguished leader and scholar with a PhD in education, master's and honors degree, cum laude in education management and policy, and Bachelor of Education. He has 9 research publications and is also the president of the Walter Sisulu University Convocation. He focuses on graduate debt clearance, and he was the former Institutional Forum Chairperson and Convocation Deputy Chairperson or President. Dr. Mantashe also has coached schools to win national moot court competitions in 2018 and 2024. He also led the Walter Sisulu University Debate Union to a historical semi-final and was the best speaker at the National University Debate Championship. So I'd like us to truly welcome our speakers, of which we're going to be discussing the second Trump presidency. What does it mean for South Africa? So I'm just going to read the summary, and I'm going to let you, Prof, get on your way. The summary goes as follows. As the second Trump administration begins to shape the United States foreign policy, South Africa find itself at a crossroads, facing critical decisions about its relationship with the US. In an era where diplomacy is being tested, South Africa's position on key global issues has led to escalating tensions with the US, seeking a pound of flesh from the country to restore its strained ties. South Africa's relations with the US soured because of South Africa's domestic and foreign policy positions, including South Africa's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its relationship with China, and the ICJ case against Israel. Triple BEE policy, the signing of NHI bill, Bella bill, and the Expropriation Act. Consequently, South Africa has already faced cuts in funding for essential programs, the expulsion of its ambassador, 10% punitive tariffs, and the introduction of a bill to sanction senior government and NC officials who support US adversaries. The country must now navigate potential exclusion from the African Growth Opportunity Act and diplomatic isolation. This roundtable will explore the implications of these developments, examining South Africa's options moving forward. Should the country reassess its foreign and domestic policy priorities, or does a permanent shift towards BRICS and African integration offer a better path forward? Each lead discussant is going to have 15 minutes to talk to the 2 questions below. The first question is, what motivated the US aid cuts to South Africa, and how are they affecting the country? Secondly, how might South Africa's trade relations with the US change under Trump, particularly concerning AGOA and punitive tariffs? So I'd like to give the podium to you, Prof. What an impeccable record and experience. So we hope to learn more from you as we unfold the topic and discuss on the table. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to accept this invitation. I've had the opportunity to dialogue on this subject 2 weeks ago with colleagues at Mandela University, and I welcome this opportunity today, and I'm thrilled that there are so many people joining us. My talk in part starts with a more broad view of where the Trump policies are coming from. And then I hope that in the remarks from my colleague here and in our question and answer, we can delve always more deeply into its direct impact on South Africa. To understand overall the disruption to world affairs that the Trump presidency has brought, it's necessary to understand the world that Trump is challenging. At the end of the Second World War, the leaders of the victorious powers came together in a meeting at Bretton Woods outside Washington, D.C., to set what they thought could be the post-Second World War framework, a framework that they felt could be prosperous for the entire world and based upon understanding of what they felt had caused the Great Depression. And their vision was based upon a world of relatively few tariff barriers, whereby goods could be made wherever they were most cheaply done and traded throughout the world. This would give to the private manufacturers of goods a greater choice on where they could seek the best profits for their labor. This system was only partially put in place, however, at the end of the Second World War because of the existence of the socialist bloc, because of the Soviet Union and later the People's Republic of China, who simply did not agree with that approach to international economics. But it was put in place in the remaining capitalist world to a degree under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. That remained in place until the very important development in the late 1970s, when the People's Republic of China, after years of isolation, decided to move its economy forward, not by further integrating with the Soviet Union, its socialist ally, but rather by seeking to integrate China into the world capitalist economies, and began to do so from that day forward, and eventually gained, a decade or so later, very good low tariff access to most of the capitalist world, with the resulting success for China as an economic power in the world that we know today. At that same time, there also was the growth of other Asian countries, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, which also were integrating into that world economic system and becoming a workshop for the world, making so many of the products that were being consumed in the United States, Japan, and Western Europe. And then, of course, there was the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the 1980s, beginning of the 90s, that allowed this system to become a worldwide system, done under what was considered the Washington Consensus, whereby it was agreed now that the prospects for so-called free trade and low tariff barriers throughout the world that put greater emphasis on the primacy of private corporations over governments was considered to be now universal. And in American politics, it was. Both the Democrat and Republican parties fully embraced this view of the world. But it had impact. Yes, in the United States especially, the globalized world created by the Washington Consensus, yes, it kept consumer prices low in the United States, but it led to widespread loss of manufacturing jobs, as well-paying manufacturing jobs that had secured the prosperity of the American working class from the end of the Second World War into the 1990s went away overnight as millions of manufacturing jobs moved to places as far-flung as Mexico, China, Taiwan. And while the workers didn't wind up on the street, they wound up with much less well-paying jobs and caused great disquiet in communities across the United States. This is where Trump comes in. Trump begins his political career in 2015 championing the cause of these workers, primarily white workers, though there were also workers of color who had suffered, but primarily white workers who had lost their well-paying jobs. He, of course, was a rather strange messenger for this, being a multi-millionaire real estate developer. But he came with the view that this system that had produced this problem in the United States needed to be reversed, and that from the first day of his presidential ambitions, he was committed to bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States and to take them away from countries where those jobs had migrated to. And he was committed to doing this by raising the tariffs, the tax that such manufactured goods brought into the United States would pay, one, to raise revenue, but with a longer term goal of forcing the transnational corporations to make their product in the United States. I will give you an example that is very close to home to you there where you are in Buffalo City, East London. A key target in South Africa of this policy is the Mercedes-Benz plant in your city. Because what that plant does, it specifically makes automobiles for export to the United States. And it is able to do that because there is virtually no tariff on those vehicles. They can be made with cheaper labor costs in your city and shipped across the world, my Mercedes-Benz, to be driven by American owners of Mercedes-Benz. What Trump's policy, by placing a minimum of 54% tariffs on products from South Africa, is basically to force the Mercedes-Benz Corporation to manufacture those automobiles within the United States. Whether that will actually succeed, one doesn't know, but it obviously portends very negatively for that plant in East London. And it is in general the motor industry that in a lot of ways is the particular target of the tariff policy of the Trump administration. Few economists believe that this is a workable policy, but it is being pursued by the Trump administration and the people around him. And as you know, it has caused great disruptions in the world economy. How exactly it will be carried out over the long haul is unclear. Trump has, as a result of negotiations with China, backed down to a degree. But please know that even with the temporary so-called pause in tariffs between the United States and China, they are still at 30%, which is higher than at any point since the Great Depression almost a century ago. And so they still have the potential impact of very much disrupting trade between the United States and China and the whole world economy, because that trade amounts to $580 billion a year in bilateral trade between the United States and China. What does America First mean in defense and security? What it does not mean is the United States is not downsizing U.S. military presence overseas. That is continuing. There's no bases being proposed to be closed. All remain open, and the Trump administration very willing to use its military might, as it showed recently in Yemen, to achieve what it believes to be U.S. foreign policy goals. The only difference is that, and this doesn't directly relate at all to South Africa, but more to U.S.'s military allies, is that it expects others to bear more of the costs of the maintenance of U.S. military personnel in their countries, Europe in particular. This policy, admittedly, was implemented first in the case of Afghanistan, where the administration, in his first term, Trump believed that that war was bleeding the United States dry and that the United States needed to get out, and was willing to do so, even in the process sacrificing the American-backed government that it had supported for so many years. And now the same is true with the war in Ukraine. Trump and the people around him were very much feeling that that war was bleeding the United States dry, that it was spending money that they wanted, that they preferred to not spend at all and to be allowed to cut taxes within the United States. And so they went ahead and pressed for a political solution to that. One thing that directly affected South Africa was the decision to end the existence of the United States Agency for International Development. That agency, about an $80 billion a year agency, not huge in overall dollars, but significant. That agency had a lot of programs that were part of a long-standing soft power approach of the United States in the wider world, of not being only seen as the purveyor of military might around the world, but to do humanitarian good around the world. One of the signature programs of that from the Bush administration was the HIV/AIDS PEPFAR program for Africa, which involved billions of dollars of money to African countries, including especially South Africa, for the prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS. The people around Trump absolutely and simply do not believe in soft power. They simply feel that that is a waste of U.S. resources, and therefore they want those programs ended around the world, maybe with a few exceptions of food assistance. But that meant that the $440 million that the United States was contributing to South Africa, the only foreign aid for South Africa, would be ended. And representing 20% of South Africa's spending on HIV/AIDS, it is now a challenge for South Africa. I'll just mention one other issue, which helps also to understand why South Africa has been targeted. Simply put, while there are some complications in this analysis, Trump is the most pro-Israel president of modern times, both in his first term and now in his second term. He is a complete backer of the Zionist state. And that therefore meant that the people in his administration are particularly outraged by South Africa's principled stand of taking Israel to the ICJ for genocide in Gaza. And I think that issue, more than any other, helps to understand the antipathy that South Africa has received from the Trump administration. I'll leave my comments there and look forward to hearing from my colleague, and will be very willing to take any questions that you have during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Prof. What a precise and clear presentation you had there. We will now like to welcome Dr. Mantashe, who's going to continue with the presentation, and then we will then discuss, let the floor discuss and have a Q&A with Prof and Doc together. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me just confirm that I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for this invitation, and my greetings to the professor, Professor Gary.
Sorry, Dr. Mantashe.
Yes.
Oh no, I was wondering if you could show your camera, but so fine.
Okay, excellent. So I just want to begin elsewhere. I agree with the professor virtually 100% on how he has characterized how we have arrived here in the circumstances in which Donald Trump is pursuing certain foreign policy positions that are problematic to South Africa in particular. But I want to say three things that are related to the objectives of the United States. The first, obviously, is to maintain its global position. The second is to basically pursue the free market principles, provided that those market principles do not violate the first position, which is the position to maintain global power. In other words, if in the eyes of the United States, capitalism becomes problematic in the sense in which the professor was talking, where you have cheaper goods coming from China and from elsewhere around the world, whether it's in Thailand or Cambodia or any other nation, then the United States position is going to be that such a free market principle is problematic. So that is its second objective. The third objective is basically to prevent enemies, its own enemies, from rising. And in this context, it views China in particular as its number one enemy. In fact, in terms of the characterization of China, it views China as in two ways. It views it both as a competitor and an enemy because of the rising power of China. So let me just deal with this aspect of the wanting to remain as a global superpower, because it's critical to understanding why Trump behaves the way he does. And I don't want us to understand Trump merely as an individual, but to understand to be a true representative of the United States. I'm sorry, there is an echo on the other side. Thank you. So I'd like us to understand Donald Trump as a true representative of the United States imperialist character. And so that when we kind of study him, we see in him the true nature of the United States as an entity that wants to remain in power. Part of the problems that the United States is suffering from currently is that the manufacturing jobs are in China. The second thing it suffers from is that the Chinese have dominance over the sea insofar as they control the shipping. The United States also used to be highly involved in the design of ships, but now the Chinese have taken over. But part of the other problem is that the United States power is not only waning in manufacturing and losing dominance over the sea. Part of the other problem is that there has been a wave of countries that do not seem to partake or accept the position that the United States should remain a superpower. And so this is something that concerns Trump as it does both the Republican and the Democrat Party. So I think it's a very important principle to issue to understand the United States global position. And so it's engaged in geopolitics by and large. And South Africa is a tiny part of that problem. And how the South African government gets involved in this is obviously partly because of what we've done with regards to Israel, but certainly because of the general principle that the United States has adopted, which is to promote free market principles, which is my second point. The United States has taken the view that its Western hegemony has to be maintained by spreading free market principles at all costs, under all circumstances. If you remember the history of this own country, in 1987, an occasional paper was written by the IMF suggesting how we were going to transition from apartheid to democracy. And part of that occasional paper set out these free market principles and neoliberal values. And part of these would include structural adjustments. And if you recall, we had to introduce a VAT in 1991 from 0 to 10%, and we are now sitting at 15%. And so the idea was also to cut social spending on various aspects such as education and health, deregulating the economy, which means basically sell state assets and stop putting regulations that seek policies on beneficiation. And this is why Elon Musk was quite angry at South Africa. It's precisely because he didn't accept the idea that he would have to share, he would have to give a 30% share of his entity to a local South African. And so the idea of these adjustments, structural adjustments, such as cutting social spending, deregulating, and privatization, are some of the mechanisms that the United States has been using over the past 70, let's say 60 years to try to beat countries into submission to the free market neoliberal values. So the US aid must be viewed in this context as part of a continued foreign policy, and the professor calls it correctly as a soft power. AGOA also was part of the soft power. So what AGOA was actually trying to achieve was to maintain the position of neoliberal values by, giving African countries preferential market access to the United States, so that we could be able to sell the stuff that we produce here to the United States. The problem with this is that obviously the underlying and sometimes the unwritten principle under AGOA as under USAID has been that we will continue to observe the rule of law and respect private property and not tamper with the patterns of ownership of the means of production in South Africa. That is to say, we would not nationalize the Reserve Bank, we would not nationalize any banks, we would not nationalize any mines, and certainly would privatize some of the assets such as the South African Airways. And we would equally continue to privatize energy, as it is the case with the IPPs. So this is part of the larger foreign policy of the United States, which is to pursue its goals. So AGOA isn't just an act that enables us to trade with them, but it's an act that keeps us in check so that we do not deviate from the principles that the United States pursues. And so this is the context that I think is critical in a discussion of this sort. And so tariffs themselves should be seen in light of the policy positions that we have been taking, as much as they should be seen, broadly speaking, in the context in which the professor has outlined in this discussion. So for example, with the tariffs, what we have is we have made policies that the United States does not like, and these policies include the Bella Act, as you have outlined in your blab, the Bella Act, the Expropriation Act. And by the way, all of these policies were made through the so-called democratic parliamentary legislative process, but the United States is unhappy with this. So you can see the United States does not necessarily like the rule of law. It simply likes the kind of rule of law that it agrees with. If you have a rule of law that is democratic, that arrives at a decision that the United States does not like, then the United States will punish you by taking the funds from USAID and potentially by forcing you out of AGOA. And this has actually happened to countries that have been seen in the eyes of the United States to be problematic. So tariffs must be understood within that broader context, particularly in the South African context. And of course, around the world, they should be understood in the context in which the professor was talking. The final point that I wanted to make was obviously that the United States wants to prevent its enemies from getting nuclear weaponry or getting dominance. And this is why, countries that we tend to align with will obviously be found in problems, will be entangled in problems with the US, because we're basically friends with the enemies of the United States, like Russia, like China. And China and Russia, China has has business in South Africa in the same way that the US does. And so we are also a, if you like, territory of the contradictions geopolitically between China and the United States. And so we will, as an ant, suffer from the fights between China and the United States and the Russians. What Trump is trying to do in the United States is to pivot from Russia and from the foreign policy of the United States against Russia to bringing Russia closer with the hope that it can weaken Russia's relations with China. And so we are friends with both China and Russia, and we are part of BRICS. And this kind of, as I was saying, entangles us in these kinds of problems. So what I wanted to do in this discussion was to just lay bare those broader themes around what the objectives of the United States are and how we get affected by them and how we should understand US aid. So US aid can be understood, for example, as something that is beneficial, but politically, if you want to really understand what it's about as soft power, it's really something that beats us into submission, just as AGOA and just as the tariffs. I don't want to prolong the the opening remarks. Perhaps I should better engage in the discussion that shall follow. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Doc. You still had like 4 minutes to continue the presentation, but it's okay. I think due to the respectfulness of time, we can move on to opening the floor for discussions. You mentioned very important things such as the rule of law, in the international global stage. The only thing that rules, my lecturer used to say, is that there's anarchy. So everyone rules themselves because as states, we deem ourselves as sovereign. So no one can rule another person unless, that's why we have these state entities, international state entities that try to actually massify the law and put it to states that we should follow some sort of civilness as if we want peace as the globe. So we would like to open the floor to everyone who's has joined us to make comments or questions to Prof. and Dr. Lunga Mantashe. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to add one more thing. So when you pick up your hand, it obviously points that you are number 1, number 2, number 3. So I'd like us to follow in that respective manner. Thank you. Yes, Silva, you may speak.
Thank you very much. Whenever anyone says Trump, my ears start prickling because I keep saying, what is he doing today as well? What is next? But coming to the presentation, I wish it was much longer. I would love to have you guys again. But let me start first with Prof. I think, Prof, this actually goes deeper and you've elaborated in a broad way. And what comes to mind is a number of things, because when you talk about the US aid, and the soft skills which is being given out, really, it started actually with Kennedy in terms of the portrayal of how America is looked worldwide. And even then, when you also mentioned even things like Mercedes, in the reality of the matter is that with the African countries, we are not really into manufacturing. We are more of consumers, and things like the car manufacturing, like Mercedes, is actually German made. So some of these realities we also have to start facing and waking up, especially as Africans. And then when I think of it again, yes, I hear what Trump is saying. He wants manufacturing back again in the USA. But if he looks at the Generation Z, I mean, who is going to go back to the factories? That's the reality of the matter. And even some of these very, like the cars or the cell phones, the pieces are all over the place. You get them through different areas. So it is not as if a whole mobile phone is made in America, or a whole whole car is made in America. They are even got from South America some of the things in order to assemble. So the reality, what I'm asking for is that we are talking here about power dynamics, and we are going beyond where a pact was made after World War II. And rather than looking at that, maybe Trump is looking at it from an, or is it oligarchy kind of perspective, saying, let us come back to the, I don't know what illusion or dream he has of saying, let us be the kings, those ones who are rich or those who have backgrounds. Because not only with South Africa he's alienated especially with Europe, where they also are having a wake-up call and saying that we are not playing, the game is not the same anymore, we are changing the playing fields. And a lot of us don't know really what the playing fields are. And that is my main question. I'm saying, where is it going to? And in actual fact, it's not as simple as it is. Yes, South Africa came up and had the guts to stand up to the big lions or the elephants and say, yes, we're taking you on principle to Israel. But I think it even goes slightly deeper than that as well, because there have been many wars and many fights as well, despite it being despite Trump being pro-Israelite and even following the very Zionists themselves. The other question I wanted, or comment I wanted to make, which can be a question as well to Dr. Mantashe, is that when we talk about free trade, the free trade in a way was brought in by Thabo Mbeki during the 80s stroke 90s. And when he brought this up as well, there were a lot of compromises which were made with South Africa in 1992 with the agreement of the economy. So that in a way, and we were actually constrained in how we go about, even with some of the things we produce and some of the, including the VAT, which came afterwards as well. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at this again and we're saying here are the power dynamics, so it's good that South Africa joined the BRICS. Many others have now are joining the BRICS. But when you say, is it an alternative? I am not quite sure. Because I look at the AU and I see it as almost like a lame duck. So I'm hoping that the BRICS might have some more power, but the reality of the matter is that even Israel does have some kind of relationship with America. The mere fact they're in space together, they have a working agreement. Even if Trump doesn't like China, the reality of the matter is that China does produce some more. In fact, it produces almost 80% of the products that the world is consuming now, and at a cheaper rate because they are still well invested in manufacturing and they have got the labor force as well. So I'm saying these are the things we have to contend, that when we're looking at geopolitics, we are looking at something that is reshaping. And by the time, in fact, his term, 4 years, Trump's 4 years is too long. By the end of this year, a lot of us will have to decide which side are we really on. And what exactly are we saying? Are we going to continue on the old principles or the old deals of what was made at the end of World War II? Or are we going to continue with IMF, where they dictate about whether there are fluctuations in terms of our currency or what type of currency? Or do we have to look for alternatives, think outside the box? Because Trump himself has still a lot of more surprises than we have. And he's still going to shake the world a bit more. Thank you. Those are my comments and some of the questions within.
Thank you. Can we have Mpendulo and then Mr. Luvo Kasa?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much, Prof. and Dr. Mantashe, for this insightful view as to what is currently happening in South Africa and the United States. I joined a little bit later, but there's something that I'd like to understand, especially as we are busy trying to amend these relations between South Africa and I keep saying China and America. My main question is on President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit. I think he will be in America. I don't know whether, Prof, you addressed this while I was still away. I believe that Cyril Ramaphosa will be visiting America to try and explain to the president this land expropriation and other so-called racial laws that have been enacted in South Africa. So looking at what has happened, especially with regards to how Trump in that Oval Office usually treats heads of states badly, as looking at what happened with Zelensky, who had to leave a bit earlier than the prescribed time. So if you look at this visit, do you think it will do anything positive, especially because in his corner you have Elon Musk, who seems to be the person going behind everything that is happening. So do you think his visit in America next week will actually yield the expected results and everything? Especially also because he's coming with him is taking one of the so-called tainted people. If you look at, I think it's Mtabisi Jonas, who once referred to Donald Trump as, I think he said racist, whatever. So, do you think that visit is guaranteed to at least try and get us where we were with America before, or it's just a waste of time as to what happened with regards to Zelensky? Thank you so much.
The Lubokasa.
Thank you very much, my good sir, and good afternoon. A wonderful presentation from our discussants, Prof. Gary, and the Convocation President of Walter Sisulu University, and the incoming President once more, Dr. Mantashe. I have about 3 questions that I'd like to ask on the discussants. What is your take on the planned working visit to the United States by our President Ramaphosa? Was he saying that he's going to the United States, and we have seen what had happened when Zelensky visited Donald Trump. Are we not worried that what transpired back then can also occur to our president? And then what would be the outlook of other countries that look up to us in Africa should what happened between Zelensky and Trump happen between our president and Trump? And the second part, looking, are we anticipating an addition to the number of the Afrikaners taking up the Trump offer to the United States? I'm asking this because some of the people who are said to be, who are said to be violated and having their land taken away from them, they are anti that, and they are vocal enough to say such is not happening. So what does that mean to Donald Trump and how he thinks, as well as the AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement? The third question, which is the last, based on the Episcopal Church, which has halted its relations, that partnership that it has with the United States government in as far as assisting refugees in America. What does that mean to Donald Trump government? Does it mean that some people in America are seeing him for what he truly is, a liar that is protected by one of our own who's also perpetrating lies about things that are non-existent, that are only happening the pigment of their own imaginations? Thank you very much.
Prof. and Dr. Lunga Mantashe, I think I will leave these questions and comments to you guys to decipher and decide how you're going to respond to them effectively. Thank you very much.
Well, I think the first question was directed primarily at me, though I think my colleague Lunga will have some thoughts on it. It's the question of what kind of world economic order is the Trump administration actually seeking? They actually are seeking to return manufacturing jobs in at least some numbers to the United States. And yes, there are people trained and ready to take up manufacturing jobs in the United States that once had them and lost them. So please understand, there are American citizens, working class people who are ready to take up the return of such jobs. whether or not his policies can actually bring that about because of the very complicated international supply chain system is to be seen. And it's not to say that American manufacturing jobs are making a product wholly in the United States. No, those manufacturing jobs, which still exist in the millions in the United States, involve getting products, component parts from overseas, and that will continue to happen. But whether there will be more end product manufacturing in the United States will be seen. It'll be the result of negotiations, hard-boiled negotiations that will occur between the Trump people and the governments of various countries, especially in Asia, where so much of manufacturing does occur. But I think in some ways, maybe and I come from a Marxist perspective, maybe we should be wanting the explosion of the current international economic system that's in place. Because we are talking about a system that is based upon the primacy of private corporations based in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. And the BRICS project, led by China, represents a challenge to that, a breakup to that system, and one which, in many ways, should be welcomed. Not to say that it won't be without disruption and difficulty, but the system that has been in place up until now has still primarily favored the countries of the global north, even as workers in the United States may have been disadvantaged. So I think we should be clear that this system, which was imposed upon, and I agree absolutely with Lunga, this neoliberal economic system, which was imposed on South Africa at the moment of the early 90s when it was in its ascendancy and South Africa was transitioning to democracy, definitely did not serve all of South Africa's interests, and its continued presence in that today doesn't. So we could look forward to a different world, not one which Trump wants. Remember, he has threatened the BRICS group with 100% tariffs if they move to create an alternative currency to the dollar, which is something that is beginning to happen. Trade, for example, between Russia and China is outside the capitalist banking system. Increasingly, Brazilian and Chinese trade is being done outside of the dollar. And so these are developments which we should follow carefully and not necessarily fall into a trap of defending the existing system just because Trump is trying to break it up. Just on the Ramaphosa visit to the United States, this is problematic situation. The arrival of the Afrikaners to the United States this week was an absolute outrage to any progressive thinking person in the United States, because this is what has happened. Trump shut down refugee resettlement to the United States that had been in place under the previous administrations, though not his, that brought on 125,000 to 150,000 people to the United States, a small piece, I understand, but people who were coming from difficult circumstances in refugee camps around the world. You could call it, again, a part of American soft power of accepting refugees from some of the most difficult, conflict-ridden places in the world, obligations to former supporters of American policies in Afghanistan, for example, that was entirely shut down. And the first refugees that come wind up being 47 people from South Africa who can't live under black rule. Racist people who cannot live under black rule, who have taken advantage of this offer to come and live in the United States. And just so you know how this is being received by progressive people in the United States, most of the normal church organizations that work to help the arriving refugees have refused to work with this group of refugees. I don't know how that meeting between Ramaphosa and Trump is going to go. Trump's policies are, simply put, racist. His approach to, and it's his whole family history, was deeply involved with racist housing policies in the New York area going back to his father. And so this is a man who has not an ounce of social justice in his bones. He is an absolute narcissist, but he is also a racist. How he then will dialogue with Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa can explain the totally reasonable policies that South Africa has pursued of racial redress, but someone like Donald Trump has absolutely zero understanding of South African history or of any sympathy for those who fought against it. So I don't know exactly how. I'm sure the Ramaphosa people are preparing carefully to not get themselves in a situation whereby he will be publicly lectured over South Africa's legally chosen policies on racial redress.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Lunga Mantashe, do you want to answer your questions and make comments on this regard?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to say that, Donald Trump's position has been to argue for what he called fair trade as opposed to free trade. And that's where his so-called principle of reciprocity came from. And there were very serious problems about how he has sort of arrived at this conclusion that a 30% on South Africa and 90% on Vietnam or Cambodia has been arrived at. So he's not a free trader. He's a fair trader, whatever that means. The second point to make is to just concur on the point around BRICS. I think that BRICS represent a real possibility and an opportunity to challenge the global order. The Chinese dominance cannot be stopped. Any real economist and historian who has looked at the evolution of superpowers will see this. I mean, probably the Brits may not have seen that they were going to lose power after the Second World War, but that's exactly what happened. If you look at where the United States sits now, it sits at $36 trillion of debt, and it owes China a lot of money. And what that means is that the United States is on the decline. And this is inevitable. History has at least, and anyone who has studied dialectics from Marx knows that history evolves because there are contradictions that leads to changes, whether these changes are gradual or radical. What we are looking at here is the gradual overpowering of the United States by the Chinese, who, by the way, are employing soft power tactics across the globe in the same way that the United States did post the Bretton Woods system in 1945. And so I think that we are really looking at a real opportunity. BRICS has to consolidate itself, of course. I mean, we have to be prepared as the world to suffer a little bit under the circumstances. As the professor says, we shouldn't be defending a system that has maintained serious poverty, hunger, and levels, with half of the world's population living in poverty and hunger. The system is unsustainable and it's self-destructing. Capitalism can't live forever, as it were, unless history would have come to an end, which is not going to happen. The third point to make is around Cyril's visit. It doesn't really matter what Cyril is going to say to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is fundamentally opposed to any notions of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So he's not going to be convinced by Cyril. I know Cyril is a very skilled politician, and, an interesting negotiator who brought us to the situation in which we are today. But he's not going to succeed. To be quite honest with you, I mean, I've followed Trump politics for, let's say, since 2015, when he came down the escalator claiming that he was going to stand to run for president. So he's not going to convince him. The point I made earlier was that the United States basically wants to maintain a rule of law provided. So it's not a rule of law, it's a rule of law on the proviso that it aligns with neoliberal principles. So the land expropriation without compensation proposition is misaligned. And this is precisely why there is this problem. And by the way, I mean, the fact that some Afrikaners are going to the United States is quite hypocritical. I mean, 50,000 white farmers control the farmland, commercial farmland in South Africa. That's about 72% of the land, commercial land, agricultural commercial land in South Africa is owned by white people, predominantly Afrikaner, if not exclusively. And so the idea that Cyril could try to explain a very basic fact to as a president, I mean, it seems to me like a waste of time. I mean, you can try to calm him down, but you're not going to achieve anything. The final point about the Afrikaners taking up the offer, I mean, think about it. In South Africa, you've got a country called Orania within a country. This country pursues what it calls self-determination as a consequence of its agreements with the governing party in the early 90s. So you are not going to deal with the problem of racism under the Trump administration, certainly. I mean, if you look at the Biden administration, it was probably far much better in dealing with matters of race. In fact, under his administration, they could even agree that there was a problem of systemic and institutional racism. Trump won't even accept that fact. He lives in his own world where the truth does not matter. In fact, he constructs the truth right from the top of his head, and he runs it like it is true for the rest of humanity. So you're dealing with a delusional, racist liar, so to speak. So you're not going to solve any problem. The final point. It seems to me that if we want to deal with the problems of the world today, we've got to be the ones who decouple. The United States under Trump claims that it doesn't want to listen to Scott Bessent. It didn't want to decouple. They just want to rebalance trade, whatever that means. You're not going to solve this a problem unless we are prepared to decouple in a very serious, radical way. Decouple with the dollar, de-dollarize, and pursue. It's a good thing. I know people died in Ukraine and Russia, but it's a good thing that happened because it gave Russians an opportunity to learn how to live without a SWIFT payment system and to decouple to some extent from the rest of the world. By the rest of the world, I mean the United States and the European Union. So that's what we need to do. We must decouple radically and speedily and pay the price, and then the world will probably be seriously multipolar at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much, Doc. I think the precise context of what we were trying to discuss today has been unfolded, at least has given us at least a window of what you are looking at in terms of global politics and how South Africa enters this, or how is it involved in this whole atmosphere of politics. And I think Lenin and Marx actually described capitalism at its highest form as how it is now in terms of global politics, where, you know, America just wants everything at the palm of its hands, of which, you know, many countries have then now moved away from depending on it since World War I, because countries have been just moving away and trying to form an independence and sort of like an interdependent sort of space where like they depend on each other as little as possible. And America is still in denial of these courses of events that are taking place. And so we find ourselves in contradiction as to how we should act as South Africa in terms of engaging with these countries and keeping the form of principality of who we are and what our constitution serves in the globe and how we should treat our people. But since we've come to the end of the presentation because of time, even though I've wished that we could discuss more, I hope that at a later stage we could be joined by you guys so that we can unpack more of it. And I'd just like to thank you, Prof, for joining us. Thank you, Doc, for joining us. I mean, the ground is looking very good for you, and people are just saying that Dr. Lunga Mantashe is going to be our next president for the second term. I hope that the elections for you go very well and everything that you wish for and want to achieve is well achieved in that manner. We need radical voices like you.
Chair.
We need, yes.
Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, please just indulge me in one question to both of them. Just
Okay.
indulge me, please.
I think I can do that. Are
Thank
you guys okay? Prof and Doc, are you okay with that?
That's okay.
I think we
Yes.
can go.
If Donald Trump treats Cyril Ramaphosa in the same manner that he treated Zelensky, do you think he should get up and walk out, or should he take the insults? Thank you.
My answer is that I think he will take the insults. You know, Cyril is a very skilled politician, but I doubt that Donald Trump will actually do that, because I think Cyril has a particular way of engaging in politics. I don't think it will arrive at that. But if it does, he will not stand up and leave. He is a very serious diplomat.
Yeah, he'll more follow the lead of the way that some other politicians like Starmer and Macron and others. I mean, they've also had to deal with the president sitting there saying completely inaccurate things about the relationships, whether it be with Britain or France or other countries, and they sort of know when to intervene and not. Plus, I don't think Cyril's position is obviously in contradiction to Trump's, but Zelensky was in a particularly difficult position because Zelensky, just so you know, Trump considers Zelensky the reason he lost the 2020 election, because Zelensky refused to give him dirt, in quote, on Hunter Biden in an exchange that's well known that got him impeached. And he blames Zelensky for not being president in 2020. So that made that meeting particularly problematic. I'm sure that Cyril will have to suffer some outrageous, inaccurate statements while in front of Trump, but I'm confident that he'll know not to take the bait. The main thing that South Africa needs to do, just to be clear, serious South African and American trade negotiators need to work out what South African and United States trade will look like going forward. Because the United States needs South African trade. South Africa sends to the United States very important minerals from the ground, which it cannot get otherwise. And it also gets agricultural products from South Africa that cannot be produced at the time, at the season that they are needed in the United States. So South African United States trade is like trade between so many countries is necessary for both countries, and it's necessary, therefore, for serious trade negotiators to work through those details. The Mercedes-Benz plant might wind up having to retool and make cars for some other place in the world, but I think the basics of South Africa and United States trade will survive the Trump administration, and the farmers, especially in the Western Cape, who depend upon exports to the United States, will survive.
Thank you very much, Prof. Unfortunately, I cannot allow any more discussions because we have to close. But thank you very much, Prof, once again. Thank you very much, Dr. Lunga Mantashe, once again. Session has now come to a close. Thank you everyone for joining us and discussing with us. Till next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Mantashe. Sorry for using the wrong email address. Prof, thank you for availing yourself. See you soon.
Yes.